So, welcome everybody. This is Balaji, founder of Council, Teleport, Coin Center, Earn, and now CTO at Coinbase. So maybe we can actually just start even more broadly. You want to give us background outside of crypto? Because
That's an old photo. All right. Yeah. So that's my quick background. So BSMS PhD at Stanford, also in electrical engineering, MS in chemical engineering. I taught CS and stats at Stanford for a few years. Nadav rather, one of my former students. Ryan Breslow is as well, actually. After that, I founded a genomics company called Council, where I think there's another tab or something on that, where basically we recently sold that company for $375 million, so like pretty good exit. We built a robotic genomic clinical lab doing machine learning on variants before robotics, genomics, and machine learning was the new hotness. That was like, we did that in like 2010, 2011. So scaled that, built that. I was CTO and co-founder of that. After that, I taught a MOOC with 250,000 students. I joined Anderson as a general partner, did a bunch of angel investments, early Bitcoin investor, Ethereum. I was, I think, the first angel in Soylent, early Zcash investor, et cetera. Most of the major cryptos I'm probably in. One of the things I did, so in 2015, I took over one of our portfolio companies at A16Z called 21. I'd helped set it up prior to joining A16Z. Long story, but turned that around, fixed that. I guess I can talk about that. Turned that into Earn, sold Earn to Coinbase, and joined as Coinbase's CTO last year. And recently we announced we have scaled Earn to more than $170 million in sales over the last year. And you're starting to see some of that publicly with the Earn drops that we've been doing, where it's not like a normal airdrop, but an Earn drop where you actually have to go and earn the crypto to do things. And that's me. Earn is going quite well now. Yeah.
how long do you think it is before somebody can earn a living on Earn?
That's a great question. So I think the long-term goal for Earn is anywhere there's a phone, there's a job, right? So just like you can open Twitter and waste your whole life on Twitter, right? Fight on Twitter, there's always someone ready to fight, you know? So like, just like you can do that on Twitter, the goal would be to do that for Earn, but productively, right? So the last 10 or 15 years of social networks, you've been liking, poking, and tweeting each other and making friends. And I say, screw making friends, time to start making money, all right? So you open up, the vision would be you open up the Earn app, you scroll through it, there's these various tasks, and initially, and here'd be the ultimate vision, right? The ultimate vision would be you're a person, you're in India, you're in Africa, you're in South America, you have a phone, right? But you don't have anything else, right? So you boot up the Earn app and we don't know anything about you, you just know you're a human being. And if you're a human being, well, we can give you CAPTCHA style tasks, right? So you do like, labeling of images. This is a cat, this is a dog, like 2 clusters, 1 cluster, whatever, right? And then we can push educational content for free into that feed, like a JavaScript course, right? And then if you do well on that, boom, now you can join the JavaScript list and start getting $10 tasks, right? And so in this fashion, we would add, like a lifeline to anybody anywhere in the world where they could start doing tasks, learn, boot themselves up, increase their human capital. Go ahead.
Can you contrast that with Mechanical Turk?
Yeah, big difference. So the big difference is Mechanical Turk, if everybody knows what that is, Amazon Mechanical Turk, you can have low skill tasks that are done. But Amazon Mechanical Turk has no concept of a profile or identity or high skill tasks, right? So because of that, it's limited to the lowest common denominator that only a human can do. But if you combined Mechanical Turk plus LinkedIn profiles plus crypto, you have something that I think is way more powerful than any of those individually, right? So for example, at scale, you could do something where, hey, I want to get a second opinion on a medical thing, boom, let me hit 1,000 dermatologists, right? I want to get a second opinion on a contract, boom, 1,000 lawyers, right? And those folks can answer those messages while they're in line at Starbucks or what have you, right? So I think that's going to be a very important application for crypto over the next 5 or 10 years is earning, and stay tuned to Coinbase for more on that.
So this, if you sort of generalize that out for a second, it's an interesting concept because what you're really doing is you're taking all of these pockets of talent all over the world and sort of unlocking them, and it's kind of interesting sitting here in San Francisco and Silicon Valley, which has enjoyed effectively a monopoly on technical talent for 20, 25 years.
Well, that's a great example. You're redesigning a thing, let me get a second opinion from 50 CTOs, right? You pay them $100 each, boy, that's cheap relative to anything else you might be doing.
So does that make you think, if that's the way the world plays out for the next 5 or 10 years, are we at peak Silicon Valley? Like, is the sort of the monopoly of Silicon Valley having all the talent in one place basically over?
Well, so is it over? So I think peak Silicon Valley arguably was 2016, and the reason I say that is, I think in retrospect, that was the first year that it was proven. In 2017, it was the first year it was proven that decentralized crypto networks can achieve valuations like on par with like the biggest Silicon Valley tech companies, right? That's a new thing, right? The only thing that has a greater network effect than Silicon Valley is the cloud itself, right? And that's the only thing that can beat it. It's obvious in retrospect if you say that, but everything that we've been doing in Silicon Valley, what have we been doing? We've been putting docs in the cloud. We've been putting Hangouts and messaging and social networks, and every single thing is in the cloud other than the last piece, which was venture capital. Venture capital remained a bespoke business where you'd walk up and down Sand Hill Road. And do you guys know why? Why people walk up and down Sand Hill Road? It's because of the 1934 Act, right? The SEC prohibits general solicitation for investment, right? That's why you can put a billboard on 101 for users, but you can't put it up there for investors, right? So the entire ICO movement in 2017, obviously its legality in the US is still TBD, but when you start going from the mental model of a country, or rather the government to a government, right? Well, there's 100 plus governments in the world. It's probably going to be legal somewhere, right? And that's essentially what's transpired. So once you were able to raise capital online at scale in 2017, that's the end of that's peak Silicon Valley, and it's just declining from there, and I think the power moves out. It's less obvious today because we're in the crypto winter, but like when the next boom comes, it'll be like very obvious the power shift that's happening outside. There's other dynamics as well. I mean, price is a signal, and that signal is saying, get out, right? It's saying get out of San Francisco, right? Like San Francisco is expensive and getting expensiver. If you look at the Lyft IPO or all these IPOs that are coming, there's a lot of people who have a lot of capital to throw around, and they're going to bid these already exorbitant prices higher, right? At the same time, there's other graphs that show quality of life in San Francisco is dropping or whatever. So as price soars and quality of life drops, at some point you start getting a breaking point, right? Your seed round will go 3 or 4x outside of San Francisco, and that's another topic we can get into.
Yeah. So how do you think? What does this mean for like company formation and what companies look like if all this plays out?
Well, so I mean, I think there's going to be a long transitional period where lots of folks still start Delaware companies and C corps or whatever. But I do think that eventually every single term that we have in venture capital, like liquidation preferences and pro rata, whatever, every single one of those things will be put into smart contracts on the blockchain. And what that does is it addresses the short-termism of the 2017 ICO boom programmatically. Right? The problem is if you can raise a bunch of money and liquidate it and the founders get money but the investors don't, that is disalignment of interests. And so it turns out that we've evolved over the last 30, 40, 50, several hundred years, frankly, of just, English common law and then, American VC, all kinds of things to ward off those edge cases, like drag-along provisions, right? Or, ROFRs, right? All of those terms will be put into smart contracts, plus more that we can't even think of to ensure long-term alignment of interests. And when that is done and that is completed, you actually have something which is really interesting, which is you have something that is more trustworthy than the American legal system, right? And we're already seeing this in the sense that on coin tables, as distinct from cap tables, I see far more international free trade collaboration across borders, right? At the same time we're seeing all these tariffs and other walls kind of come up, I'm seeing at the seed stage for the first time, many times you'll have Chinese and American investors on the same coin table because venture capitalists don't trust the Chinese legal system, or American venture capitalists don't, and vice versa. Chinese investors typically don't trust the American legal system, but they can both diligence an Ethereum smart contract, and they can both invest in a blockchain denominated thing. And so I think that's going to be this huge story over the next 5 or 10 years, and it's going to really globalize the incoming flow of funds.
Yeah, this is really fascinating stuff. There's kind of another side to the coin, to use a pun, is like from the founder's perspective, if you can be anywhere and earn digitally and earn crypto, you may not even have to use your real name. You may not even, there are like downstream implications of that from the entrepreneur side as well.
Yeah,
and you have this like great thoughtful framework. I thought it would be great to talk through.
Something I've given some talks on and thought a lot about is that I think in the future, people are going to have their real name and their earning name and their speaking name all be different, right? And just to play that out a little bit, if your bank account is your stored wealth, your name is your stored reputation, right? And only you can really debit from your bank account. Well, I mean, the state can as well if you have like a lien or something, but for the most part, only you can, right? But anybody can debit or credit to your name simply by writing an article or putting up a video that surrounds your name in negative adjectives, right? And nowadays, everybody is not just a journalist, but a public figure. So the refuge that was previously there, like you had to be a star or a celebrity, is no longer there, right? Like if you're on the internet under your real name, you've put up a global identifier. Another word for a name is a handle. So visualize like a handle where someone's pulling the file of information on you, right? And that happens all the time, right? If somebody gets into an unpopular situation on the internet, boom, the handle's pulled, attack, right? Okay. So what is the kind of evolved societal defense against that, right? What I think happens, one of the greatest things, I mean, Satoshi, what he gave us is so amazing. It's got so many different implications. But one of the most amazing things is he's probably the world's first pseudonymous billionaire, right? Like arbitrary amounts of money can now be made pseudonymously, right? And, so what that means is you can create value, but, like if folks try to dox you, they try to assassinate your character, it doesn't matter. It just washes off like rain, right? Like if you think about Satoshi Nakamoto, there's a million articles on Satoshi Nakamoto. This cloud, of energy floats around him. All these journalists have tried to dox this person or people, but the human walks unscathed, right? It is a real name that's the bridge between this cloud mealy and the physical person. And if you deny people that bridge, well, every problem in computer science can be solved by another level of indirection, right? And so denying that bridge, this is what I think about a lot. I think about the pseudonymous bridge, right? So we've solved it for money in the sense of something like Zcash. You can take your net worth, convert it into crypto at Coinbase.com, turn it into Zcash, right? Send that offsite, and then do a single shielded transaction. Boom, you're now off the grid, right? Local laws may apply. But what you can't do is you can't take your name and your backlinks, right? Because taking your name and then pseudonymizing that's less obvious how to do that, right? So, one way of thinking about that is your money is fungible, and therefore like $1 is as good as another dollar, one ZEC is as good as another ZEC. But the set of backlinks is a great way of thinking about your reputation or your name, like your Twitter followers or the folks who will take your call or whatever, right? Those are non-fungible, and porting them to a pseudonymous environment is non-obvious, right? Now, one thing, of course, you could do is just like start clean over here, and on purpose, just start clean pseudonymously. Another thing that could happen, and I think this does happen in the next 10 or 20 years, is people start using not just one pseudonym, but multiple pseudonyms. They speak under one pseudonym and they gain reputation under that, but they earn under a different one, such that if this person tweets the wrong thing or people yell at them on Twitter, like the trail stops cold over there. They can't get to their earning, right? They can't cut off their income, their bank account, all that type of stuff, right? And by doing this, it's sort of like, bastions within the context of AWS, if you guys are familiar with that. You don't just like log directly into the server that's serving all your funds. You have like a bastion, and then that like gets you into another one. It's indirection. It's the same as cold storage, right? You start putting up levels of indirection, and what's funny about this is it's kind of like an ancient truth that we're rediscovering, right? Like in European culture, Chinese culture, Indian culture, many cultures, knowing someone's real name gives you power over them, right? And if you don't know the real name, well, it's like kind of hitting a ghost. So I think that's going to be a big, big thing. People are going to start treating real names like social security numbers and only putting them on official forms, when mandated to do so, and just using pseudonyms. And in fact, the youngins have already started doing this. Everybody knows what Finstas and Rinstas are? Yeah? So you Gen Z, millennials, whatever, for those who don't know and who have become old, by the way, for 29 years of your life, you're young, then 11 years you become old, right? That's happening to me next year. Okay. So for those who don't know what Finstas and Rinstas are, your Rinsta is your Instagram under your real name, and your Finsta is under a fake name. And so the Rinsta is like the kid in their graduation attire next to mom, apple pie, and the Finsta is them being a kid, right? And it's under some fake name. Now the funny thing is the Rinsta is the fake them, and the Finsta is the real them, right? And so that's an evolved behavior which 10, 15 years younger than us, those kids are already doing. So I see this wave of pseudonymity creeping up. Anyway.
Yeah, that was a fascinating concept. So this also has, I think, knock-on effects on notions of community, where part of what made Silicon Valley work was a collection of people who shared a number of similar beliefs, physically co-located in one place.
Yeah.
And sort of another knock-on effect of earning moving to being purely digital is the ability to sort of co-locate digitally along belief structures and what those communities look like. So can you talk a little bit about how you think that plays out and what the implications are in terms of belief structures and communities and how that moves online, or how that might even reflect from online back into the real world?
Totally. So so one thing that I think is, like the V1.0 version of that, but it's already at massive scale. This is an observation that's not original to me. I think it's either Sam Altman or Silver Keskula of Teleport, but AI is actually breeding humans right now. Okay, and what do I mean by that? The matching algorithms on Tinder, right? The recommendation algorithms on Twitter, on Facebook, etc., are putting people of similar interests together and are responsible for a very large percentage of modern couples, right? Like, the Washington Post had an article from a little while ago which showed that the percentage of people who met their partner online is the majority across, like, everything else is down. Church is down, restaurants are down, bars are down, families down, friends are down, the internet is up, taking share away from everything else, right? So, and then what's up is basically these matching algorithms, right? So AI is already breeding humans, and what I think about when I think about that is the Russian Siberian fox experiment. Okay, so what is that? So actually, very, very important experiment in biology. If you haven't heard of it, so there's a Russian guy in the 40s or 50s, and he wanted to see whether like what could be done with animal breeding in like one generation. So he took these Russian Siberian foxes, and he took them and he said, okay, I'm going to take one group, I'm going to try to domesticate them. I'm going to take them and mate them amongst each other to try to make the most friendly kind of things. I'm going to take another group, the most aggressive, and mate those and see what happens there. Okay, so something remarkable happened. Within just a few generations of dog years, right? Like a few dog generations, the foxes that were mated for like domestic kind of behavior, their ears started to become floppy. They started to bark like dogs, which foxes don't do. And he essentially like reconstructed like the millennia-long process of dog domestication in like a few generations, right? And these foxes would lick their hand and would eat like sugar offered to them and would basically become tame, right? Then conversely, the ones that he bred for aggression were like slavering nightmare creatures that would like, you can see videos of this stuff, by the way, online. Like they'd bite the glass or whatever. They're like Insandy Wolf from Reddit, if you know that. So like it was like he created these like fearsome kind of creatures, and that just happened within a few generations of assortative mating, right? So that's what AI is doing. Okay, we are right. Yeah, we are basically. I mean, the amount of Star Trek knowledge some of these couples are going to have is going to be amazing. Like they are mating them on the basis of interest, right? So you're just going to have all of these subcultures and communities which are just like the maximum amplified version of themselves in both good and bad ways.
And so can you sort of play that forward? Like what does that mean for how community aggregation happens online? Does this have implications kind of in the offline world? So kind of, I know you've talked a lot about, or thought a lot about things like what happens, you kind of alluded to this, like what happens to the average person in like India or Nigeria, where like, the world that they're entering is not a transition world. It's like sort of if you're 18 today in India, you have a phone and you're going to have all this content you place forward 10 years. Like you didn't go from Silicon Valley into a transition world. Like
right,
you leapfrogged and entered this new world. And so what are the implications kind of in the real world for people in, I guess, two parts of society. One is people who are like in India or Nigeria who are sort of entering this world. And then there might be very different implications for people in, let's say, Beijing or San Francisco who sort of have an existing world order that will need to transition into this new world.
Right. So lots of things to shoot out there. So basically, one thing that's happening in India now, I'm not sure if everybody's aware of this, but Reliance Jio is like a new provider that's come online in India, and it's added hundreds of millions of people to like 4G LTE just over the last few years. So India has really hit like the J part of the curve in terms of like internet growth. And it's now, like at least like the latest metrics I've seen, it's now like number 3 worldwide for unicorns, right? So it's like the US, China, India. It's actually now number 3, right? And starting to really grow. So that's a really interesting market because in some ways it's like, 10 years behind China, maybe always will be, but it's definitely kind of accelerating. And those folks, when they come online, they're actually like a totally new demographic and threat. Like people have talked about, should I say threat? Not really threat, but let's say force, worldwide. For one thing, if something like Earn or whatever works, you have a bunch of folks who you can bring in for lots and lots of different kinds of tasks, right? So people have been talking about automation, but I think you're going to see scaled outsourcing on a level that you haven't seen, right? And one way of thinking about this is, if you're like an American middle class kind of person, well, if you're an employer, it's actually kind of hard to employ somebody else on a middle class salary, right? If you're making $70,000 and after taxes, you've got like, $40,000 or whatever, and like to pay somebody else after paying your room and board, it's like really hard to do. Where you're paying them $20,000, you're really scrimping and saving. So the workaround for that until recently has been to employ a machine, right? Use Amazon Web Services, right? You basically, and that's a new thing, by the way. Like the last 10 or 15 years have allowed that middle class person to gain leverage by employing computers to do tasks and thereby like becoming more and more productive. What I think crypto does, plus the rise of the internet in all of these developing world countries, it does allow you to employ humans, but not a $20,000 a year American, but $1,000 a year, Nigerian or Indian or South American or whatever, right? And crypto makes that easy, right? I think that's a big story of the next 10 years that folks haven't really thought as much about. Remote work is like V1 of that, but I think you're going to see like more of that. And that becomes more feasible as more tasks become possible to do over a computer. You can do transcription and you can do, like labeling of videos, and more work becomes fundamentally digital, right? So anyway, I think that's a big part.
Maybe on that we can open up to some questions I'm sure people have.
Go ahead.
My question is about pseudonyms.
Yeah.
So it seems like in America we have very strong protections around anonymous speech, particularly in a non-commercial context.
Mm-hmm.
We also have Citizens United, which says that money is speech.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm wondering what laws actually govern moving large amounts of money peer-to-peer anonymously?
Oh, there's so many. Like, I mean,
repeat the question because we're.
oh, sorry. Yeah. So the question is, what laws exist that govern like the flow of funds anonymously?
So it's not the PSA.
Well, so they would probably argue with you on that, right? Like, so all kinds of AML, anti-money laundering provisions, and so on. I mean, there's a text of it, and there's also what they consider their jurisdiction. I think
PSA
that's
specifically calls out peer-to-peer transactions as exempt from the PSA.
right, but basically the question is, how peer-to-peer are they, right? Like, are they facilitated by a platform? Then that platform may have responsibility. I think this is going to be a real area of contention over the next several decades, not just years but decades, because there is a tension between like the right to privacy, which is definitely growing, financial privacy being a part of that, and a bunch of the statutes on this. So I think that's going to be a big area. Hey Dan.
So on the same subject of sort of pseudonymous identities, I assume that whenever your sort of indenture, I guess, to 21 started, part of what they were,
That's a good way of
the
putting it.
reason they were willing to trust you was that you were putting your identity on the line, and then for the next several years, felt like you had to actually stay involved, and and you felt like if you walked away, that would be your reputation permanently burned. So like, how and this the same reason why I wouldn't, for example, invest in like an anonymous ICO. So maybe I'll trust like Satoshi's already built the code.
Yep.
But even if I could totally diligence a totally anonymous founder, I don't think I'd want to give them money because, again, they could just discard that identity and walk away. And now, even if they're not stealing the money, ultimately, like you sort of, they're not aligned with you because they can walk away.
Great question. So what I'd say there is, well, two things. First is the reputation point in 21 is a little different. It's because I was associated with the company at the beginning that some people invested, and therefore that's when they called in the chit later. It's not so much that anybody else could have run it. Nobody else would want the job or whatever. So they just kind of like called in that chit later. That's one part. But to your other part of your question, I think there's a big difference between anonymous, pseudonymous, and full name, right? And the difference is 4chan is anonymous, Reddit is pseudonymous, Facebook is real name, right? And those are different kinds of cultures, right? And the big difference is a pseudonym can build up reputation, right? Satoshi certainly has an amazing reputation, and all he would need, or she, or they would need to do is prove it with a private key, and a lot of people would listen to them, right? So I think that's the solution to what you're saying is folks can build up the reputation pseudonymously nowadays, and they can earn pseudonymously, and they can show a track record of being respectable, and that would hopefully give you the confidence to invest in them. Sir. Yeah, Arjun.
If Silicon Valley peaked out in 2016, what's your long-term exit plan?
Great question. Well, I've been talking about this actually for a long time.
So just to repeat the question, if Silicon Valley peaked.
If Silicon Valley peaked out in 2016, what's my long-term exit plan? Well, I've been into Singapore since before Singapore was cool. Very, very, very pro Singapore. Actually, I think I got a lot of early Ethereum people into Singapore, and I think that's part of why they're there. The thing about it is, I think in the future, small countries are going to do pretty well, especially small countries run by very tech-forward leaders. So, for example, Estonia, their president, Thomas Ilves is a computer scientist, and actually Singapore's prime minister, Lee Hsien Loong, he is Lee Kuan Yew's son. He's also the wrangler at Cambridge. I'm not sure if you know how good that is, but he's like a really good mathematician. He could have been a research mathematician, and he posts computer science problems on his Facebook page. He actually really knows what he's doing. And then Netanyahu of Israel is an MIT graduate, right? So those are three small countries which I'm very bullish on, right? Which have sub 5-10 million kind of people, because they can act fast. They're startup countries. So I think that you're going to see a lot more of that, a lot more energy towards that kind of thing. And I'm mostly bearish on larger countries and larger political units, with the exception of China. I think China is basically sophisticated enough that I'd be very bull on them. That's the one exception that may prove the rule.
Kind of riff on that for a second. So, wave a magic wand. You're in charge of the United States. Game theory that out, right? So what would you do?
Wave a second magic wand, get out of the United States.
But I've heard you talk about concepts like special economic zones or sort of experimental zones where people might be able to try stuff. Do you think big countries could actually replicate some of these things using some tactics?
Not today. I think it would have to be something like, how Microsoft was reformed by Google, right? But the reform process took place because Larry and Sergey went. They were not intending to reform Google or to reform Microsoft. They went out, did their own thing, and they proved out that open source worked, that the cloud worked, that search was a business model that could scale, that Office software could be done for free. They proved all of these things, right? And each of those points was completely contrary to Microsoft's culture and everything that had worked for them. Ballmer fought it tooth and nail for the better part of a decade. All that is public record. He called open source communism, blah, 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 right? And he was bearish on search and bearish on the cloud and whatever, right? For a long time. And then when Satya took over, he had, the proof points in these other companies and organizations that had done all these things that had been argued against within Microsoft. And then he used that to help reform Microsoft internally. So now Microsoft's a real player in the cloud. Azure is actually doing pretty well. They're innovating. They're actually doing real stuff. Their Surface is pretty good. Their tablet's pretty good. But all of that could only have taken place if the alternative had been obvious, right? And it's the same thing I think that happened, with China itself, for example. When Deng Xiaoping took power in 1978, after a very circuitous thing, by the way, everybody should understand the history of China. How did the country become rich? Pretty important thing to know. Very few Americans, when I ask them that question, can give me a blow by blow of how that happened. But roughly speaking, the country was under Mao, and it was communist, and literally entrepreneurship was punishable by death. You can Google NPR story on this, the contract that changed China, right? And essentially, what happened was when Deng took over in 1978, all these farmers who were just under the hand of the state, he's like, okay, maybe we'll let you keep some of what you harvest, like some, right? And that was this massive, thing, this massive breakthrough. And, he set up Shenzhen, this special economic zone, as you referenced, because he didn't try to reform the entire country at once. He did one small piece, and he said, capitalism is legal here. He didn't call it that. He called it communism. And the critical thing was, it was across the causeway from Hong Kong. And it was the examples of Hong Kong and Singapore and Taiwan that gave him proof points that this thing would work. Even though for 30 years, the entire propaganda within China was communism is good, capitalist order, shoot them, kill them, etc. Right? And so those external proof points gave him the ability to reform internally, and did it piecemeal. He first got Shenzhen to work. That worked so well that he expanded it to the eastern seaboard. He got 3 or 4 more, and then boom, 15 special economic zones, and then that started unlocking the China story that we see today. So I would not want to, like, the United States, I think is, no, I don't want to run that. And actually that's why I didn't want to do the regulatory role at the FDA. I think you just have to exit, build something different, and then reform from without. Sarah, actually, let me get somebody else because you asked some questions. Yeah.
So a lot of the economic prognostications that you're making are towards more economic globalism, but there's a lot of talk, in particular in this community, around political nationalism.
Yep.
And so I'm wondering how you see those two trends kind of colliding over the next 20 years.
Great question, and I think of it as like the new political axis is going to be what.
You're supposed to repeat the question.
Oh, yes. Thank you. Sorry. Great. Thank you. I appreciate that. So to paraphrase, tell me if I got it right. On the one hand, I've talked a lot about kind of economic globalization through technology, but obviously nationalism, political nationalism, and socialism and so on is rising now, right? And both of those are things that assume the primacy of the state in many ways, and borders and what have you. And how do those two trends, right? Yeah. And what I think is that the new political axis is going to be not so much left versus right, but the cloud versus the land, right? So meaning the international cosmopolitan entrepreneur who's comfortable crossing borders versus the person who is very wedded to the state, either as a nationalist or a socialist, and both of them presume that the state is there to either enforce borders or redistribute wealth or both, right? And it's a different axis. We're in the middle of that kind of rotation that's happening now. And I think you're going to see that, I don't know, complete in 20 years, but these rotations take a long time to happen, right? But you'd call it a realignment or whatever. And I think that actually, the cloud may never win an election, but will never lose in the market, right? So it'll always be outnumbered. Like Silicon Valley is not going to win any or many elections. It's just a small group of folks, right? But boy, does it make amazing things, right? And so I think what happens is, you have all of these immigrants who've come to SV who just become more mobile. Like imagine this kind of floating group of folks who descend in this country or that country, and it's kind of a love-hate relationship where the nationalists and the socialists love the fact that these folks are bringing money, but the nationalists don't really like the fact that there are all these different countries or religions, ethnicities coming in, and the socialists don't like that they're rich and what have you, right? So there's a tension there that I think is going to be a big part of the next 20, 30 years, maybe more.
You talked about Vinsta and Finsta. I imagine the regulators are going to love the concept even more than they love Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
If you say in your post-Coinbase life were to do something, how do you avoid your idea being basically dead on arrival?
Well, what do you mean? Oh, like in what sense? Like what?
In the sense that if they're trying so hard to control our financial infrastructure, they're going to want to control identity even more.
Right. So good question. All right. So the question is, if regulators want to control financial infrastructure, wouldn't they control identity more? I mean, so I believe in being a pragmatic ideologue, right? So an ideologue means, like you have a fundamentally ideological drive. There's something you want to see. You believe in financial privacy. You believe in, a future of economic freedom and so on. And that is a 20, 30, 40, whatever your vision. But I'm also a pragmatist and work within constraints, right? Orange is not my favorite color, right? And so, we work to stay 100% compliant with the law, but recognize also there's many governments around the world, right? So 100% compliance, file all of your stuff on time, your letters and so on, but recognize there's other countries. And those countries want Silicon Valleys over there. And some of them are enlightened, right? And yes, some of them are, really. But so for example, a generalization of special economic zones are like special innovation zones, right? So for example, in North Dakota, they've got a drone zone where drones are much more liberalized because you're flying over, nothing much of the time, right? And that's fine, right? It's like high population density means there's more downside for flying drones, and lower population density means there's not. Singapore has, in a different way, self-driving car zones where self-driving cars are legal in different neighborhoods, and they're doing experiments there. The UK and other places have a so-called fintech regulatory sandbox where you can push harder and do more things with fintech, whereas otherwise you might require a license, right? And so what I think is going to happen is there's going to be countries, zones that realize, hey, I might not be able to be competitive worldwide for software talent, but if I put a line through this old law and I allow drones or self-driving cars to be legal here, well, I can become the Detroit of self-driving cars, the 1950s Detroit, not the modern one, and attract a bunch of talent, right? And this would be something that would be to one's advantage. So that's a countervailing force that means that at least some regulators are incentivized to be liberalized, to be pro-technology.
You want to wrap it up? Any closing thoughts? Anything you want to say before we get out of here?
Buy Bitcoin, no.
On that note, thank you again.
All right, great, thanks.
Great talk. Thanks,